Hey guys, Trevor John coming at another Path of Exile video. Alright, so this video is going to be a very specific video. We are going to talk about my explosive arrow character. Now, do not be alarmed. Yes, I did get lucky and I got a mage blood that has definitely affected this particular build. However, it's not one of those things where having this item make or breaks this build. And I'm actually doing in the upwards of 60 million damage. I'm going to break it down to you as to how I'm doing it, why I made a few decisions to swap some gear and different types compared to a lot of the other build guides out there. And I'm going to kind of cover as much as I can, as much as I can really remember as I've done modifications as we went here, and then just talk about in general things I've experienced, how it feels, and I'll probably show some of the bossing. Now, I have done a lot of the bosses. I've done Sirius, I've done Uber Adziri. I've done quite a bit of them here. And honestly, I'm about ready to do Maven. I got to do some more farming to do that. But honestly, I don't really worry about doing the in-game bosses, to be honest. I kind of like to just play the game as it is and, you know, try to juice up some maps to have fun, have a little challenge. I do like to play with the economy, don't get me wrong, but it's not like the economy is what really drives me, so to speak, and having all the bosses done. So if you're looking for that type of a build, this may not be exactly what you're looking for. But if you're looking for a very strong, powerful, explosive arrow build, we'll kind of dive into it and explain it a little bit, and I'll try to remember to throw some footage in the background of actually what's going on in the game and how easy some of these fights work, because they were pretty easy. So first things first, let's go ahead and let's just pull up the POB, because honestly the easiest way to tell anything on the build and know exactly how well it plays is to pull up the POB. So as you can see here right above my head, I am at 62 million damage on the account here. We have one warning, and it's that Infernal Cry cannot be used, but it actually can. I actually de-leveled it so that way I can utilize it. And the reason why is because you want to make sure you are using Infernal Cry for this particular build, because you can see here, 62 million. And if I get rid of the Taunted, notice that you lose quite a bit of damage here, all the way down to 22. So you definitely want to be using Worthy Foe here for your taunts, because it makes them take so much more damage. So what you do is you go around and you bind your Infernal Cry to your movement skill. That way you're just automatically proccing Infernal Cry constantly as you run around and do totems, and it makes a big difference in the amount of damage you can do. If you're not utilizing Infernal Cry, it's not even just for the taunts in general, it's just so that way they adds the extra buffs from like your ascendancies and a few other of the nodes that you've taken on the tree. So definitely keep that in mind. Also, as you can see here, we are utilizing a lot of tattoos in this build. So this build may not be fully viable next league. The main thing that I am using these tattoos for is because I currently have all of my reserve skills on. So normally what you would do is you would actually toggle, what is it, Malevolence? Yeah, you would toggle Malevolence off technically, and you would just flip-flop in between having Determination and Malevolence on for bossing. I did not like that because, one, I forget constantly, battles will take forever. I wanted Malevolence on. So what did I do? I used tattoos to go ahead and reduce the amount of reserve mana needed to utilize these. I also went ahead and swapped it and started using Vitality because I wanted as much regen as possible, because I was noticing that as my DPS was growing, the vulnerability also was growing, right? That's definitely something that happens on a lot of these builds where you can kind of lose track of like, oh crap, yeah, I'm glass cannon, this is going to be great, and then you run like the one map of the modifiers that just destroy your character, and like, oh man, that was kind of a bummer, right? So you got to keep it a little bit more well-rounded. It's not always about getting as much damage as possible, but how tanky, how good the feel is of the character itself. Does it play with your play style? That's the other key difference and notable, right? But yeah, so we are definitely utilizing tattoos. So next league, we may have to tweak this again. I'm probably going to keep this starter build myself, just for my own knowledge on like, hey, next league, I want to make this again. I want to follow my guide. I'm going to get to this certain point, so on and so forth. And we're going to play it and have fun with it. But there's nothing else that really stands out as far as the like what nodes we're taking here. Biggest things to take away is obviously like what jewels we're utilizing. Obviously a prismatic jewel, you pretty much always have to have those. They're pretty standard in most builds out there. This alone gives me like 3.6 million damage. And the other one that we're rocking is actually one that is just a normal kind of like jewel, right? It's where is it at? It is right here. And it's increased attack speed with bows, increased life, chaos res. It's helpful. Not as something that you have to necessarily have, but it's definitely very helpful on my account. It's definitely made progressing a little bit easier, right? Having these types of nodes here. But yeah, overall in general, nothing crazy with the tree. We pretty much just stuck everything as it was. And if I were to ever level up past 93, because I think that's where I'm currently stuck at, right? Yeah, I'm stuck at 93 currently. If I were to go up a little bit more here, if I were to grab 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more nodes here, you'd see my damage would go up by another 4 million. Because this spiritual aid right here, what this does is increase in reductions to minion damage also affect you. So basically you build all your minion stuff up, all your modifiers, utilize this, and it gets all applied as well. That would be if I were to take this particular character to 99. I will never do that. I'll be lucky to see 94 in this league, and that's okay with it. I'm totally fine with it as well. Okay, let's go ahead and let's go over to the skills and talk about them directly. So we have Explosive Arrow. Now we're using Explosive Arrow, Combustion, okay? And then we have Empower, Elemental Damage with Attacks, Life Tap, Ballista Totem. Now, a lot of people are utilizing the Explosive Arrow, and they're using the, what is it, the Divergent one? Yeah. I think it's yeah, I want to say it's Divergent. It may be a Nominalist, actually, but I want to say it's the Divergent. But I noticed that I lost a lot of attack when utilizing this. I think the build got a reading was Ziz, and they had definitely a modified Explosive Arrow. And then it dawned on me that a lot of that build was triggering on dot damage that was taking a little bit longer for ignites to explode. And I thought in my head that, you know what makes more sense to me is let's shorten the amount of time that's needed to trigger the ignites. And that way you may not do as much damage, but you're at least blowing them up faster, was my thought, so it would clear a little quicker. Turns out that concept works. So it kind of worked out good for me. And I'm just rocking a 2120 default because that's all I honestly needed. And if I sit there and I try to upgrade my quality here, notice that it actually makes my damage go down. So it's just one of those situations where this turned out to work much, much better for me. Now, obviously I have my Malevolence, Summer Skin and Bots, Grace, Determination. I got them all in one helm. Why? Because I want to make sure that I have them all in the same helm, because it's just easier to manage that way. Now, these are not qualled up, but it's because it doesn't really do anything for you. So no sense in wasting resources for them. All right. Next we have the Blink Arrow. This is basically just moving around. This is all I use Blink Arrow for. It's a movement skill with Culling Strike that I utilize. Nothing major to talk about there. Arcanist Brand, Flame Ability, Flame Surge, Life Tap. Straightforward as always. It's 2 different debuffs that you place, so that way you just do a crap ton of damage. It works out really well, and it's very nice. And then also Infernal Cry, cast when taking damage, so that way when you do take a little bit of damage, it automatically proc the Infernal Cry just in case you haven't done it already. That way you just kind of like a safeguard, right? Like sometimes you forget, so you may want to change a little bit of your build to play your play style, where you're like, oh man, I always forget to hit my flasks, or oh man, I forgot to hit those debuffs. How can I make those proc automatically? Throw a cast when taking damage, and then they'll proc then, right? So it's just little things like that that'll really help you start min-maxing and really taking your build from like the baseline to really the high. Like, okay, yes, this is exactly where I need to be at. All right, so items. This gets a little interesting. So we have a thicket bow. Why do we have a thicket bow? Because I could not get a short bow to save my life. I've tried. Unless I'm using the divination cards and getting a 6-link short bow out of that, I'm not getting anything great. And honestly, trying to craft it is even harder because I can't get a good short bow to begin with. So I actually got lucky and I bought this particular one. Now this is actually pretty good. Overall in general, this alone gives me 58 million damage. Your bow is going to be your most key characteristic of your account. So without having your bow being a +3, it's very detrimental. Okay, so first things first, you gotta make sure you're running a +3 bow. Next, this damage over time is actually major. Having damage over time, fire damage over time multiplier, and increased elemental damage with attacks, that alone takes your main stats to the next level. You want to try to utilize those as much as you can, because actually if I could get more elemental damage with attacks up higher, I would do exponentially more damage in general. damage over time because of the way we're doing our damage, right? Because we're shooting an arrow into an enemy and then we're igniting them, exploding them, which then causes the character to be ignited and or burned. So there is dot damage. So you want to explode and exponentially grow your dot damage. So having that on there is huge. Now, also taking all of that and then getting some damage over time multipliers, fire damage over time multipliers, 49% increased damage with bow skills, elemental damage with attack skills, like that coupled with the bow together, these synchronize super well to give you a lot of attack speed, a lot of elemental damage, a lot of dot damage, which is massive for any type of explosive arrow build. All right, helm isn't necessarily as important in the build as a lot of the other things could be. So for example, we are doing what is this? So explosive arrow deals 40% increased damage. We did go and farm that during the doing the labs. We rolled, what is this? Physical damage hits taken as fire damage and increased flammability curse effect. I could probably re-roll the flammability. I don't know that it's necessarily needed, but I'm just leaving it as it is because honestly the build's pretty solid at this point. But we got chaos res, so that way we can try to keep that capped because we are capped on chaos res. We got lightning res. Increased mono reservation, that one was huge. You definitely want to make sure to have as much of that as possible, especially if you would like to try to do what I'm doing where I have all my active skills, reservation skills active. So you definitely want to make sure that you have at least enough mono reservation on your helm because it's going to be the easiest place to get it. So definitely keep that in mind when you're trying to do other things. Also, the famous physical damage reduction while focused is noticeable. So this also gives you focused as well. So you make sure you proc it, and you do actually feel the damage that you're taking is not as bad as what you thought it was. So it definitely helps out a lot. And also, I forgot here. This is why we left it. Actually, is the on the helm is we have 8% physical damage taken as fire and 7%. So we're trying to stack those so that way we take all of our damage as fire damage and then mitigate it, which has definitely been helping my survivability on this build a lot. Okay. Next, the chest piece. The chest piece has got a lot of currency on it, unfortunately. This was not cheap, and that's because if you notice here, the malevolence has 28% increased aura effect, 25% increased fire damage. These are not your standard Searing Exile and Eater of Worlds. These are actually the more expensive orbs. So this was a huge gamble. This one took me several divines to roll just these alone. On top of that, we have max rolls on life, armor and res, and life regeneration, which is huge. And then we have some resistances and some stun and block recovery. I don't even care about the stun and block recovery. The resistances, not really needed, but they're just nice to have in general, just to cover yourself, right? The gloves, once again, these have a very unique thing that they're adding to my build. So basically increased damage over time. Now we're stacking an additional almost 40% just from the gloves. Gloves are typically considered a piece of gear that's not necessarily damage related. Usually that's where you're going to do like your extra frenzy charges. You're going to do your extra, maybe some skills like your cat skill, or maybe doing some sort of res or armor evade, that kind of stuff on your gloves. You don't actually get usually a whole lot of damage out of your gloves, at least not a lot of the builds you see out there today. However, having all this dot damage definitely makes you do a crap ton more damage. As you can see here, this is 6.9 damage that this actually gives you. And you can see this because you can see the combined total damage here in the red to the right of my head. That's where you see it. Always look at your POB. Each piece of gear will tell you what it's bringing to the table. Boots, so this is where I kind of did some testing. So we had some yellows. They worked well. They worked really well, actually. Then I noticed that, you know what, having these boots seems to work the best because of the frenzy charge, right? So because we get movement speed with frenzy charge, we're zoomy. Plus we're getting an additional maximum for frenzy charge, which helps us, and we get to once again be zoomy. Overall, in general, these boots happen to be the best budget boots, and they're super cheap. So it's not like anything costs you a whole lot on this build to begin with. Overall, this entire build probably cost me maybe 50 div total, minus the mage blood, which I got lucky. I actually rolled that from ancient orbs this league, and that took me 1,008 ancient orbs, which only cost me about 26 div. So I guess overall in total, 76 div invested in this build for 62 million, but it plays nice, and you don't even need to put as much damage into it as what I have. Mainly focus on getting the correct bow, correct quiver, sorry, and having very good body armor. Like, those three things are going to kind of make or break this build. And the only reason why I say the body armor is because you want to make sure you're tanky. If you're not tanky, you're not going to do as well in the fights. Amulet, Onyx Flights, you don't have to use it. You can. It does help with a lot of damage here, but you could honestly swap this in for a rare that you've done some modifiers on, and it'll work just as fine. But I'm using the Onyx Amulet because it does so much more damage for me. Then we have both rings here. Now, typically, you don't ever see an opal ring being utilized, but once we've talked about so much of this whole elemental damage, right? And the fire damage and increased elemental damage with attack skills, like, it's just kind of a no-brainer that you need to have all these on this particular build just to make sure that you do all the damage possible, right? And it's okay if you kind of switch things up a little bit. You don't have to necessarily use an opal ring. I'm using one because I can. I've res capped already, so I don't need to worry about having res on my rings. And so I'm like, hey, you know what? I'll go full damage. And then obviously an amethyst ring, almost every build has at least one of these just for the chaos res. But once again, we got elemental damage and we got increased fire damage. Like, notice the pattern that we're really trying to stack on an explosive arrow. So if you're trying to min max an explosive arrow build, these are the stats you want to take up for, like look for. You want to increase attack speed, dot damage, fire damage, damage over time, multiplier. Like, those types of damages increases help you so much on these builds. It's not even funny. All right, and then obviously we do have the mage blood. What's it do for me? It does quite a bit here. It allows me to have my amethyst flask always on, so that's my chaos res cap. I have my sulfur flask, which is increased damage. That helps a lot with increased movement on it. Quicksilver flask that stays constantly active, which makes me immune to shock during effect, which is always. And the ruby flask here, which is fire res and 20% less fire damage taken. Now, this is not actually needed on this build. However, I'm using it on this build because this, coupled with my my helm, where I'm converting fire damage or physical damage as fire damage. This is why I'm utilizing that flask, because what it does is it also 20% also allows you to take 20% less fire damage taken. So not only are mitigating a lot of the damage because you're converting it to fire, now you're also taking 20% less fire damage in general. When I actually take this flask off and say I swap it out for something else that just does a little more damage for my build, I actually notice that I lose a lot of tankiness, because with this being active, a lot of the damage I take, I don't even feel, I don't even notice, and it doesn't bring my health that low. Mainly because also I have a crap ton of life regen on this build as well, because I'm actually at, what is this? Life regen is at 508 per second. My total max is 4,200, so that's what, a little over 8 seconds, and I'd be fully healed all the time. And that's honestly how I play. If I start to die, I run around, wait 2 seconds, and I'm almost half life again, and I keep going back, right? So it does make a difference. It makes it more playable and a lot more enjoyable as well, because I get to do a lot of various different aspects of the game and content, and honestly, I don't get slowed down. It's great. I gotta tell you, it's really, really good. Now, if you don't have a mage blood, it's totally fine. You can actually go, and I believe if we were to say we grab the belts here, and we just go for, what is it? The diamond belt, the diadem belt, right? It's not what that's called, something like that. There it is. Yep, this one right here. Yeah, so as you can see here, this is the one that is probably the other one that's going to work well for you, and it's 1% damage leached against chilled enemies. That doesn't help you, but ignites you inflict with attack deal damage 35% faster. That's really helpful. You don't want to do any physical damage anyway, so once again, super helpful, and it's got life and res on it. Overall, solid belt. The only reason why I'm using my mage blood over this, because one, mage blood, duh, and then for two, I don't know, it works. I like having my flasks the way they are, but yeah, without them, it's totally fine. Rock this belt, you'll lose 1.2 million damage, but whatever, you're still over 60 million with this setup here, and it makes a difference. So hopefully this helps you guys. A lot of this stuff, by the way, because I don't ever want to come off as someone who made this build or did all the research on this. This is not, I'm not the originator of this. This is only a tweaking that I've done to match my playstyle and the gear that I found and acquired. I want to give full credit to where it's due. I stole the base of this from Ziz himself. During one of his videos, he's really been enjoying Explosive Arrow. I also enjoy the playstyle of it, so that's where I got it from. I don't want anyone to say otherwise. I would give credit where credit's due. But yeah, anyways, that's where we're at with the tree. So far, it's worked well. I'm actually really loving this build. I also just started working on a Bone Shatter build, and I've finished up a Cyclone build here. I'm trying to get a couple more pieces before I make a video on it. But I've definitely enjoyed it. It's been fun, and having the Mage Blood and go ahead and throwing this in different various builds has been a lot of fun. I've been doing that recently, and I really should have been recording all these builds I've done with them. But I always forget because you get excited and you're like, oh, let me do this, let me do that, and let's flip a bunch of stuff to get the divs to do it. And yeah, so but overall in general, 60 million damage works very well. POB link down below. Leave comments, questions below. I'll try to help you as much as I can. Once again, biggest things to make sure that you get right on this build: the weapon, the quiver, body armor. Get those done first, and GG, right? Because then you can get all of your skills. The majority of your skills are gotten, and that's where most of your damage comes from. So, all right, that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.